This is chapter 14 of the Initiate, Some Impressions of a Great Soul by Cyril Scott. And the name of the chapter is The Re-Meeting of Gordon and Gladys. As already implied, the letter comprising our last chapter was from my married sister, but I possessed another and younger one who was of so different a temperament that the theory of heredity, in face of that fact, always struck me as only partially true and not wholly so. As Moreward explained when discussing the subject with me, heredity is only the effect and not the cause. A man, for instance, who drinks will in his next incarnation be drawn into a family where he will be able to gratify his desire. Heredity would then imply that he drank because his father drank. In other words, he inherits a body troubled by the tendency to drink. And that is true as far as it goes, but the reason of his inheriting it is left out, and the theory of heredity is regarded as the first cause instead of only the effect, the cause lying much further back. Or take another example. A man who was a musician in his last incarnation will require in his present one a body and brain of certain sensitivities. He needs, therefore, to incarnate in a family where, let us say, his mother is musical, so that he can inherit her particular type of body, or, missing a generation, his grandmother's, for the matter of that. It makes little difference. Now, most people would say at once, that man gets his music from his mother. But in point of fact, the statement is only very partially correct. He had his music long before he met his mother merely being the means of helping him to bring his musical faculties into manifestation on the physical plane in his present incarnation, and nothing further. Of course, the theory of heredity will satisfy most people because they have not as yet acquired the faculty of remembering their past incarnations, but to those who can remember, heredity must inevitably be regarded as effect and not cause, and therein lies the enormous difference. It will be remembered from the conversation I had with Moreward in Kensington Gardens that day on which he startled me by a reference to our past lives, that he believed in reincarnation, and not only as a theory but as an undeniable fact. And yet it surprised me why so little was known on the subject in the Western world until quite recently. But here again Moreward had a ready explanation. You see, he said, people deny reincarnation because they cannot recollect their past lives. Absence of memory to them is a sufficient proof of non-existence. And yet, if I asked you exactly what you were doing on a certain day, say 15 years ago, your memory fails you, though you were quite convinced you were alive at that time. Now the point is this, that with each incarnation, the ego obtains a new body, and hence a new brain, and it is solely the brain which remembers. That being so, the brain cannot register anything which took place before it was formed. Indeed, it cannot even recall a great many things that took place after it was formed. For were I to ask you, as another instance, that you were thinking of 10 minutes ago, what you were thinking of 10 minutes ago, you will find you have entirely forgotten. All the same, within every one of us are certain rudimentary organs which, by a process known to occultists, we can cause to function. Let these organs once function, and a memory which is not dependent on the physical brain is the result. That is why and how the initiate remembers his past lives. I have related Moreward's views on the subject, partly because of their interest, and partly because of their bearing on the following episode. We were both of us invited to a certain house party for a few days at which my younger sister, Gladys, was present, and also a young man for whom she had a weakness, while he on his side was unquestionably in love. But it was fairly evident that whatever their sentiments were for one another, there was something distinctly inharmonious between them, for Gordon Mellor, that was his name, could hardly disguise an utter dejection of manner, which the quick eye and intuition of my wise friend were at no pains to detect. Nor was it long before he was drawn into the matter, for my sister took at once a fancy to him, though of no amatory nature, which very shortly showed itself in a desire to speak quite frankly in his presence, after an invitation on his part that she should do so. Personally, I knew what the trouble was, namely, a false pride and vanity on her side, but as all my attempts to see it right were met with the remark that I was a man, and I could therefore never understand a woman's point of view, besides which I had very peculiar ideas, I gave all such attempts up as quite useless. Moreover, a prophet having no honor in his own family made my endeavors even more impotent than otherwise they might have been, and so the trouble had gone on for some weeks, or even months for all I knew, without any satisfactory solution. From the first day of our arrival, Morwood talked in such a way concerning matters spiritual and otherwise that he very soon awakened my sister's admiration, and, seeing that to be the case, I took the first opportunity of telling him my sister was in the midst of a difficulty, which, to my mind, demanded his sympathetic interference. Of course, as was ever the case, he showed himself only too ready to assist in any way he could, so that I contrived that we three should be left to our own devices, in order to discuss the matter without fear of interruption, a thing under the circumstances quite easy of accomplishment. I began the subject myself, as we were enjoying an afternoon ramble together a trois, across the country fields. "Your friend Gordon," said I, "does not exactly seem to thrive under your friendship, my dear Gladys." She blushed and tried to parry the remark, but succeeded very badly. "By the way," said Morwood kindly, "you and he, Miss Broadbent, interest me greatly. I have reasons to believe that you are both very, very old friends. Your friendship dates back through many incarnations, if I am not mistaken." My sister looked pleased and much interested all of a sudden. She was by no means averse to occult subjects, and was much inclined to believe in them. "Fancy your being able to tell that," she said with enthusiasm, "but how on earth do you do it?" "Well, that is fairly simple," he answered, smiling. "If you look at two people in the ordinary way, you can generally see if they are in harmony. The relationship of mother and son, for instance, is usually discernible from similarities in the physical body. For relationship of a subtler kind, one must look at people's mental bodies. In that way, one can perceive whether they are soul affinities or not." "And you think Gordon and I are soul affinities?" she asked. "I most certainly do," he answered. "Ha ha!" I exclaimed with triumph. "Ha ha!" Oh, I did that poorly. Okay. I exclaimed with triumph, "Perhaps now that you know this, you will treat him better." "I have never treated him badly," she declared somewhat hotly. "I call it badly," said I, "and you know my views on the subject, and I bet you if we told Morwood, he would share them." "What is the trouble?" asked Morwood sympathetically. "Could I be of the least assistance?" She looked at him gratefully as she said, "Well, there are difficulties, you see. That is more or less nonsense. The difficulties are adjustable." "But the fact is, you are a prig," I said, laughing to temper my uncomplimentary remark a little. "Dear me," said Morwood soothingly, "these brothers are not flattering, are they?" "Oh, he is very rude," she observed, oddly. "The trouble is this," I said, taking the matter into my own hands. "Gladys dislikes marriage and can't make up her mind to marry, but loves this man and wants him to be in love with her. As they are not engaged, however, she thinks they ought to be. Well, absolutely platonic. In fact, she won't even own up that she loves the man because she thinks even that is improper." Morwood laughed with noticeable tolerance. "Well, don't you think I'm right?" she asked. "Don't you think I'm right?" she asked, appealing to him. "Hardly quite right," he said, smiling very kindly. "There, what did I tell you?" I exclaimed triumphantly. "But really, Mr. Haig," she said persuasively, "it isn't done, not in the society I go about in. We're not bohemians, you know, and we can't do that sort of thing. But where does the unfortunate man come in? He asked, looking at her paternally. Isn't it rather hard on him? Sheer cruelty, I exclaimed. My sister pondered. Why, she won't send the man away, I said, turning to Morward, and she won't show him an atom of love. I call that flirting, yes, flirting, and of the very worst type. I have never flirted in my life, she declared, warmly. But isn't there perhaps a form of flirting, observed Morward gently, that is so insidious it hardly seems like flirting at all? And therefore is all the more reprehensible, I added. My sister looked puzzled. I don't quite understand, she said. Well, he explained, but in a tone of great kindliness, if you crave for the certainty that the man loves you, tantalizing him with your personal presence, and knowing that he suffers, yet give him nothing whatever in return, is that not what we might call a very insidious form of flirting? My sister kept an embarrassed silence. I know, he continued, flirting is an ambiguous term, and much is called flirting which, to my mind, is not flirting at all. For instance, two persons may be genuinely fond of one another and demonstrate the fact, though they may have no intention of marrying. That, however, is strictly speaking not flirting, for it is not insincere merely because unmatrimonial, if I may so express myself. On the other hand, if two people contrive to arouse sentiments in each other merely to gratify vanity, and not because they feel any love, that we may certainly call flirting, for it is insidiously asked for something and intending to give nothing in return. But surely that doesn't apply to me, she protested. Well, let us look at the situation a little critically, he said. In permitting this man a liberal amount of your society, you lead him to suppose you are fond of him, don't you? And that gives him certain hopes which you have no intention of allowing him to realize, either in the way of marriage or in any way whatever. The result is, I fear, that he suffers. In other words, dear friend, are you not buying your pleasure with the price of his suffering, and thus asking from him very much and giving nothing in return? But in the opinion of the world, she began to object. The opinions of the world, he interrupted gently, are based upon selfishness and vanity, and not on altruism and love. My dear Gladys, I said, it's no use. Your behavior is that of both a prig and a flirt, and the sooner you realize it, the better. Wouldn't it perhaps be better to be quite honest with this man, pursued Morward, and tell him that you love him, that your views on marriage are such that you do not want to enter into it? This course would have not only the advantage of being honest and straightforward, but also of giving him the choice of either leaving you or being content with your love. But that would never do, she objected. He would immediately want to kiss me. You are the most amazing prig I have ever struck, I said warmly. Your vanity is simply phenomenal, and you are niggardly into the bargain. Here you keep this unfortunate man hanging about and dangling forever between hope and despair in order to gratify your insane vanity, and you are too niggardly either to own up you love him or to give him a kiss, which would just raise him into the seventh heaven. Morward cast me a glance which was very like approval. As to my sister, she merely cast one of anger. Let us sit down, he said, and admire the view. We threw ourselves upon the grass, and then I noticed Morward gazing at my sister with a certain contemplativeness. You see, he mused after a moment or so, there are two kinds of virtues in the world, true virtues and false virtues. The false ones are those based upon vanity, the true ones are those based upon unselfishness. Yet, as far as outside appearance goes, they are not always easy to detect, because they look much alike to the unreflecting. Well, dear Miss Gladys, I hope you will forgive me for using a crude word, but the attitude you adopt towards this man, however correct and laudable it may seem from the worldly point of view, is, when looked at from a more spiritual one, merely selfishness. In regarding your aura, instead of finding it large and expansive, I find it cramped and circumscribed. And then I see indications that you have gone through this little drama with this very same man in many lives before, and each time it has brought suffering. And yet, instead of the lesson being learned by that suffering, it has each time remained unlearned, so that in your present life you are going through it all again. For love is a tie which links us together, incarnation after incarnation. But only as that love is unselfish and noble can we reap happiness from it, and should it be otherwise, the link is rather a misfortune than a joy, as in your case it proves to be because the attitude you seem so loath to alter. And what has happened before, I fear, must happen again, for in these past lives this man has left you each time and given the whole thing up in despair because his love for you has looked for breadth and unselfishness, and has been disillusioned in the end instead. He had glided into that rather melodious flow of utterance which was so characteristic of him whenever he discoursed on subjects of this sort, though, alas, my attempts to reproduce it are deplorably inadequate. You see, he continued, eloquent though at the same time gentle, you have followed the strict conventions of the world in this matter, without ever questioning whether they be right or wrong, or based on the selfish or the noble. For in this case, as with many others, you have regarded a precept right by reason of the world proclaiming it so, but have omitted to reflect as to whether it be right in itself. For the world's laws and conventions are based upon rules, making no allowance whatever for exceptions and the individual circumstances of the case. And just as a thing is sometimes right, and yet at others that self-same thing may be utterly wrong, so a strict adherence to the conventions of the world may at times be utterly reprehensible in the eyes of the divine. Moreover, to conform to a convention we know in our souls to be wrong is never a virtue, but only vanity and cowardice in disguise, and therefore unworthy of admittance into so selfless a quality as real and untainted love. And if that conformity be not only prompted by vanity, but at the same time bringing suffering to a being who is innocent, and whose intentions are upright and honorable, then it is doubly to be eschewed. For love which takes no account of the welfare of its object is not love at all, but another emotion masquerading under the name instead. He paused for a moment and looked at my sister with a benign persuasiveness, putting his hand on her arm. And now, he said, it is, as in most things, a question of choice, and which of the two is the sweeter, pride or love? And is it worthwhile to let the childish and fleeting stand in the way of that which endures, and the lesser illusion cover the greater reality? For truly is pride but an illusion, in that those who are proud attach it invariably to things it but seldom fits, leaving it altogether aside when it might be best employed. For you, like many another, are proud to conceal instead of to avow, and proud to be cold of heart instead of warm. And yet not one of these things is worthy of pride, but rather the reverse, in that they are but errors clothed in semblance of virtues, but nevertheless errors in spite of whatever the world may say. For niggardliness is the same, be it attached to money or love, and deception is also the same, the coldness of heart, and to be proud of any of these is to be proud of that which is weak and childish, instead of wise and consequently strong. And here Morward ceased speaking and looked at her with a gentle appeal. A man's happiness at stake is my plea for a little preaching, he said apologetically, and your own happiness as well. But although your love may not be very intense, you love that man as much as you are capable of loving anybody at present, and you will suffer if you lose him, which I fear will be the case very soon. And now, enough moral philosophy for one day. We are missing the sunset over the hills there, which has a philosophy of its own. And yet, however convincing Morward's eloquence seemed, at any rate to me on this occasion, as one most others, As on most others, his intervention in the matter either came too late, or else my sister's vanity still retained the upper hand, and she was incapable of changing her attitude, however guilty she may have felt in her own soul. Indeed, we had almost forgotten the incident when, a month or so later, Morwood handed me a letter in Gladys's handwriting, and it ran, "My dear Hag, I am very unhappy, and as you tried to help me once, though I was foolish enough not to take your advice, I feel sure you will help me again in spite of what may seem in my ingratitude. Gordon has left me, as you predicted. He said quite simply that he could not stand it any longer and that he prefers not to see me again. I have written to him several times, but he does not answer, and so I am afraid there is little hope of things ever coming right. It would be a great comfort to me if I could have a talk with you, and I am sure you will forgive me for bothering you, but I know you are always ready to help anybody in trouble. With kindest regards, very sincerely yours, Gladys Broadbent." "Of course I will do what I can," he said when I finished reading the note, "but I think you had better interview the man and see what his attitude is regarding the whole affair." "It strikes me you wasted your philosophy on Gladys," I said, "and cast pearls before, well, the word is not a pretty one. A little philosophy, even to the unreceptive, is never entirely wasted," he answered, smiling. "For although your sister may be doomed to suffer, in that she exacted everything and gave nothing, thinking that vanity was virtue and weakness was love, yet at the same time she has now not an inkling why she must suffer. She has now got an inkling why she must suffer, and will learn her lesson all the more easily in consequence. For now she will not add to the sum of her errors by blaming him instead of herself, and during the remainder of her present incarnation may learn that the essence of real love is to give and not to withhold, thinking all the time of self instead of the object of her affection. So when they meet in a future incarnation, as they undoubtedly will, each falling in love with the other again, her little addition of knowledge will stand her in good part, and what was this time tainted by suffering will be imbued with understanding and happiness instead."